My good friend Kurt at Cyber Ops.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, everyone. We appreciate your interest today. The last and best session is who do you call during a cyber incident, and is it an incident? And with that, I'd like to introduce our panel. To my right is Stu Paneski. He is partner at Fisher Broyles in New Jersey, and Stu specializes in data breach litigation and counsel. Anything additional?
Happy to be here, Kurt. Thank you.
We're happy to have you. We're going to have fun. I want it to be interactive. Next is Stu is Jay Harmon, principal of Borderhawk, an information security firm in Atlanta. Jay, welcome.
Happy to be here too.
And to the right of Jay, I'd like to introduce our Secret Service agent, Anna DeMarco. Anna is here in New York and has a following here of Secret Service agents. Yeah, so we are very, very happy to have Anna on our panel and talking from her perspective on incident response. And I'm Kurt Seuss, your host and speaker, and I'm the CEO of Concierge Cyber in Atlanta. And again, we provide a roadside assistance membership model for cyber incidents. So, with that, I'm going to just kind of pass it first to Jay. So Jay, what's the difference between a cyber event and a cyber incident?
So there's a lot of context that we will have to leave out and let others fill it in live with their own real world scenarios. But at the crux of it, things occur on a network. We're talking about information security, right? So things occur on a network by the millions of events, millions of little packets, millions of pieces of data a day. And then every now and then there's an anomaly to that data that makes that type of data or some type of action stand out and causes you to look at it. And so, and you're looking at it from a perspective of, is this a sign that there's a problem going on that could create a negative implication? And so there's an analysis that should be done on the event. And for us, the way we look at an event is we determine that that is an anomaly, it is an anomaly, but there's no obvious, observable negative implication that can come out of it based on some analysis. But if during that analysis we determine that something negative has occurred or is capable of occurring based on this anomaly, we escalate that to an incident. And so obviously words have meaning, and so I've heard the word event discussed in a number of the panels here today, and for us that the word event means what I shared, but so does incident. And so from a perspective of what do you do with an incident, generally speaking, that's a situation where you're going to trigger notification either to a regulatory agency, your insurance company, legal counsel, others, so that you can make sure that as you're dealing with that incident, you're effectively protecting yourself at the same time. So there's the technical side, but then there's also the people process side.
For the insurance folks, what do you think about the word occurrence?
There's a lot of them.
Well, that's in cyber insurance. There's this concept of knowledge, right, and severability. And so a lot of the cyber insurance policies, knowledge will be generally to the C-suite. That's really where you want to play, because again, if you have an administrator, an information technology or IT administrator that sees some glitches in the intrusion detection or monitoring or whatever, is that something that should be reportable? Because you potentially have a late reporting notice, or at least reporting not a claim, but a notice of an incident, potential claim, right? So that's where severability and the knowledge is really important, that keep it to the C-suite, because if they don't know, then it's not going to be a late reporting issue. So Stu, what about from the legal perspective, at what point does the organization engage data breach counsel?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. We think about that question a lot. We get asked that a lot. The reason being is because there are companies that will dedicate a lot of resources to cybersecurity. So they'll have IT department, they'll have cybersecurity operations, they'll have people dedicated to security, and so the question arises, do I really need to go tell an insurance company every time there's some suspicious activity? And the answer is no, you don't have to do that, that's your job. So for us, for an easy rule, an easy bright line, it's evidence of unauthorized access. If you see evidence of unauthorized access in your network, to me, that is a bright line that would justify filing a claim or calling a lawyer.
So what happens though as retentions or deductibles are increasing? What if I have $1 million retention? I mean, I can do whatever I want. It's my money up to that retention. Do you still notify of a potential claim and run with it?
If it's unauthorized access, I would give notice of the claim, even though you don't intend to use a lot of the insurance resources because you have a very large retention in that example. And we do that, So we for our clients, we'll notify the carrier and say, look, we had this matter. We're not, we handled it, but we're letting you know. So.
And what's the advantage of first? We've talked about this in earlier panels. Who do you call first? I'm an advocate of calling, again, you want to eventually get that data breach attorney because of certain advantages. You want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, this, self-serving as it is, we also agree that the first call, or one of the earliest calls should be to counsel. Mm-hmm. The reason for that primarily is you want to try to maximize the ability to protect the investigation under the attorney-client privilege. It may not be protectable, but you want to at least make best efforts. So that begins with having a lawyer in the beginning to, in anticipation of litigation or potential regulatory investigation, take control of the incident response and from a leadership perspective, from an accountability perspective, and filter everything through the law firm to the client to at least give you the opportunity to make the argument later that not only was the advice of counsel protected or the impressions of the client, but also the work of those other vendors that the client had retained to support the investigation. So the classic example of that would be a DFIR firm, an incident response firm. We always ask the DFIR firm to allow our law firm to retain the DFIR firm on behalf of the client. For anybody who wants to Google it, we call that a Covell agreement. Covell was a case that involved an accounting firm, but the idea was you want to be able to retain, you as the counsel want to be able to retain experts, service professionals, folks that can help you do the investigation without being worried that their labor, their findings are going to be discoverable later on. So that would be the first primary reason to call a counsel.
Mm-hmm. Now, just everyone in the room remember too that cyber. When we talk about cyber, it's not just the data and electronic assets, but we're seeing. I'll be putting that bucket, that money. We're seeing business email compromise as equally as frequent and severe as the ransomware.
Misdirected funds is very pervasive risk, and it's weird because it doesn't always involve cyber. So it kind of falls within cyber because a lot of times the means and methods of the fraud are using a computer, but there's no compromise. Right. It's just someone was tricked into sending money to the wrong place. They may have been tricked by someone else using a computer, but there's nothing wrong with that person's computer.
Right.
So it gets a little tricky.
And it's getting interesting too, because you think about the phishing attack, right? But I've actually seen, we had a company in Georgia, a construction company, and the attacker got into their Office 365 email in Azure and actually monitored construction project managers' emails, sent an email once they went to the accounts receivable ledger to the highest receivable due to this contractor, which was a school district. They wired an email coming from the contractor to the school saying, change the wire instructions to this new bank, and the school did that. 200,000 gone, right? It came from that company. Now, interestingly enough, it's their biggest client. What do? The school should probably call and say, did you change this? There could be some contributory negligence, but nonetheless, it gets really sticky. And let me ask you this, from a law enforcement, when is it best to contact you guys, and why the Secret Service instead of FBI, for example? Who does an organization call?
So, I'm not going to tell you not to call the FBI. I'm going to say call both of us. But if you do call both of us, let each other know that you're calling us. Like, hey, FBI, I spoke to Secret Service, I spoke to FBI, and I know we had spoken previously about the IC3 complaints.
Right.
Fill those out. It's not going to hurt you, so complete those reports, get it into the system, it's in the database. Department of Justice is monitoring that. we would like you to get your system back up and running. Mitigate that. Contact us as early as you can. Make sure you get a solid image or a forensic image of the breached server or wherever it is. So we can use that and later on forensically investigate the crime if there is one.
Right, and if there are no logs, Anna, check the mic too, just to make sure it's on. There you go. Just so if there is no logs, because we see a smaller organization, is that an issue?
It makes it more difficult. So if you are a company and you don't have logs, maintain your logs. Please maintain your logs. It's going to help you and your IT department, and if you have a third-party contract out there to help you monitor your incoming traffic, all of the security, firewalls, all of it, so you know or you can potentially see a threat before it happens. Makes you more aware, you can educate your employees on phishing campaigns. It's just brings more awareness.
Right. And I know that the government has the Recovery Asset Team, the RAP team, which works closely with all the local FBI Secret Service offices. So you guys have the relationship with the banks, and from what I hear, 36 hours is the window of time that if you get it to the RAP team, they have an 85% chance of recovery.
Depends if the money is still in the country.
Yeah.
So once it leaves the country, it makes it harder to get.
Yep.
It could be 48 hours, it could be, but that's at the time of the loss, not the time that you made notification. So just keep that in mind, the clock is always ticking.
Right.
One thing about the logs though, so nearly every system creates logs. Hard drives, Windows events, almost everything creates logs. So there's lots of logs that could be almost useless, but you know, without the logs, someone who's trying to do an investigation, it's analogous to driving forward very fast through the rear and looking at the rearview mirror to see if you're going to crash, right? So there's just nothing there for that to guide that person into any kind of a conclusion around what happened. And so the opposite happens. Then we have to put stuff into place to see if we can create a baseline of activity now, after the fact, left of boom, as some might say, where we can look to see if in that baseline there is evidence, observable evidence that somebody's doing something in an unauthorized manner from after the fact, right? So it's nowhere near as good, there's nowhere near as much quality, and you certainly can't produce a conclusion that's as strong when you do it that way.
Yeah, and Stu, what about, so law enforcement gets involved sometimes, and you're serving as data breach counsel. So what happens when you come in contact with law enforcement? How does that change, or does it change your managing the incident from if a client has cyber insurance or doesn't? How does that impact the way you move forward, or does it?
I think it has less of an impact now than it used to. We used to be a little bit more cautious about involving law enforcement. There was always sort of this fear that the law enforcement would take over our private investigation, but I've never had that experience. And so now I think there's an expectation that a victim of a cybercrime will let law enforcement know. I think that their stakeholders expect that. That's a minimum. And so when we have that first call with the victim client and that question comes up, I say, well, at some point you have to tell someone that this happened. Your employees, your investors, and that person's going to ask, did you call the police? So you might as well have done the IC3 report at a bare minimum, so this way you can say the words truthfully, yes, we've informed law enforcement and we're cooperating in their investigation. A truthful statement, just by filling out that IC3 form, which I think from a crisis communications perspective really builds you a lot of goodwill with your stakeholders. I think you asked a question when we were prepping about privilege, and I'm going to pull the old lawyer, it depends situation.
Yeah.
But we find that, and most of my experience I will say is with more the FBI than with Secret Service, but usually they're interested in obtaining information from our investigation. They want the list of IOCs, the indications of compromise, the evidence from the investigation, and they're also willing to share threat intelligence with us about either the perpetrator of the crime or some of the statistics that are around these types of crimes. And so the role of law enforcement is just becoming more commonplace, I think, in cyber matters.
And are you working, I'm sorry, Jeff, but, and are you seeing a lot of effort even globally? You know, so with perpetrators being overseas, you're seeing a lot of cooperation with other agencies, your counterparts in other countries?
Yes. Short answer, yes. We get phone calls weekly, overseas, domestically. We have field offices. We have people in The Hague. It's just a collaboration all over.
And many state attorney generals have produced a notification of law enforcement within a certain number of days as a requirement of some of their notification obligations.
Well, let me shift a little bit to computer security versus computer forensics. Jay, it's something I thought about, but what's the difference?
So the simple answer is computer security is what keeps you out of computer forensics, and computer forensics is what happens when you fail to do computer security.
Okay.
But
And should the same person or group be doing both? Can you?
it's two different skill sets, right? Can you? Possibly. Is that a good idea? Likely not. But I think that, so the truth of the matter, so computer security or system security, really, you know, the whole notion of focusing an organization's operations around having a culture of security and what matters, right? What matters to the company, both from a regulatory compliance perspective, contractual perspective, and leadership, pushing that knowledge down into the organization and managing it according to those requirements. From a security perspective, that leads you into a lot of different things about how do you secure, what do you secure, where do you spend your resources, where do you let it slide, where do you bring in a third party. From a forensics perspective, pretty much something bad has happened. All bets are off on the security side, so the nature and ability of the tool, well, the nature of the tools and the ability, skill set of the people that would do the forensics work are rarely associated with a company that actually does security. Now they may, right? So there's companies that focus on, and that's what they do. But the forensics activity, it requires a very specific skill set, and it has to follow evidentiary handling practices, right? Which unless you're trained in all that you're not likely to follow.
Jay, can I ask, would your answer change at all if Kurt was asking about re-securing an environment after there's been a compromise?
So if there's been a compromise and the bad actor, the containment has been handled and the bad actor and subsequent compromised systems have been eradicated?
No, my question is it the same skill set, or could it be the same skill set that re-secures a compromised environment that does the forensics?
I would still say that it's generally speaking, in my experience, been two different companies. So the people who work in a lab, who are potentially going to have electron microscopes, they're going to want to be the ones doing the forensics. They're not going to be the ones that come in and they look at your Active Directory and your data closet and your labeling and your wiring and to determine if you've got Cat 3 or 5 or fiber, right? And those multiple redundant runs versus one. You know, so that it's just different skill set, different kind of people. So could it happen? Sure. Would it likely happen? No.
Well, and you work in a lab, right, too? So give us a little context of what you do.
So I am a lab rat for all intents and purposes. I take things apart. I will image and get down to the hex level of a computer system to find out what I need to find out to gain access to it. Like you were saying, it's a different skill set, doing security versus forensics. I think we were just showing what I was doing is soldering to get into a vehicle acquisition the other day. It's a different skill set as opposed to programming and reading logs and securing a server.
I thought it was great. So Anna was last week spending time looking at automobiles. And today, you know, for example, I've got a 16-year-old son who's just learning how to drive. And I use this analogy all the time. So think about this as an organization dealing through a cyber attack. I'm taking my son to school because I have to take the car home. So he's next to me, and halfway to school, the electronics on the dashboard starts flickering really bad, like a Christmas tree light. And then I'm losing power. I'm trying to maintain the car to stay on. And of course, you know, I grew up, you know, in the 60s. There was no power steering, right? You know, I remember. Well, you lose electronics, and now I have to really steer, try to keep the car on the road, and it basically died halfway into racetrack gas station. So now I've got all the cars coming in the morning behind me beeping and everything. So think of putting yourself in the shoes of a driver 3 months into getting their license, okay? I'm so glad that I was there instead of him. But think about your client or your company that has never been through a cyber attack or theft of money, what you're going to go through. It's going to be a life hack. Now, who are you going to call? Okay? And then when you call AAA, if you have AAA, we're going to be there in an hour. Do you know how long an hour is sitting there while your car is blocking everyone trying to get in that gas station, people honking and everything? That's what your client, that's what your organization is going through at the time of a cyber attack. So I thought, and I want to shift towards, you were looking at cars last week, right? You want to give a little background and I mean, today's cars, like my 16-year-old looks at my 96 Mustang and goes, what's that thing out of the hood? That's an antenna that goes with a cassette player. Okay? I said, what, cassette? Anyways, but today's cars, I look at, I've got a family member that bought a new Lexus. My gosh, the thing, if you don't put the blinker on, it shifts you back into the light automatically, and as a type A person, I'm like, I don't like this, but they're so smart. So, I mean, what are you seeing today from a forensics? What can you glean from even like Internet of Things, autos, appliances, all that stuff?
So as far as vehicle forensics, your vehicle has so much information about you personally. Think of how many times you connect your phone to your car, your playlist, your contacts, your text messages. All of that information isn't necessarily stored forever, but it is still there like anything we know, unless it gets rewritten over. Some cars now, newer vehicles, have information being stored, what your throttle management was, what your wheel speed was, what was your latitude and longitude location at that time of that event. That's all stored in your car. So when you're going out to, let's say, Florida for a vacation and you get a rental car and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna just plug my phone in, and that rental car now has all of your information until someone wipes it or until you delete it. So delete your information every time you do anything. Don't connect your phone to just any car. Your unique identifier from your phone is stored on your car because that's how it recognizes every time you walk up to it. Like, oh yes, it's connecting automatically. So that information stays there. Something for you to think about.
It's a different world. It's a different world. Use cash. Cash is king. Unless the Secret Service is here. It's real cash, not fake cash. Yes.
And so I just want to add.
Of course.
I know Mr. Marco here is being a little modest, but because of where we are now, the state of the auto entertainment center systems, the SMEs behind that have been significant in. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Have been significant in helping some really good investigations. It's been the result of their forensic capabilities in apprehending some really violent criminals. And it's because of that, and it's because of what she just reiterated about delete your information. There is so much personal information, and it's really kind of relayed on that forensic capability that put a lot of bad criminals behind bars. So I just want to congratulate her and the forensic capabilities of a lot of law enforcement entities for doing that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I just gotta dovetail right off of that. So
Here, let's pass that back.
So I did forensics a while ago. So what does that mean if I delete my information from the car? I know there's a lot of recovery from recovered deleted information and stuff like that. So does that protect us so much from law enforcement? Not that I need to be protected from law enforcement. Is it one of those things where?
Yeah, come talk to us after.
But it does mean, but I mean that if as far as like I delete my stuff, somebody could come in behind me, right, and still kind of do some recovery, or is that secure?
That is a really unique skill to go in and
Okay.
for a criminal. I mean, criminals.
We don't have to worry
They
about
are creatures of habit. They want something easy. That
Okay,
is not
convenience.
an easy
Okay.
task to do, and it's not gonna happen quickly.
They do make USB cables that have the capacity to sort of restrict some of that data from being shared. So if you're going to connect your device via USB, there are some tools that you can use to at least block some of that data from being transmitted. Right, so you can research that and see if that might help.
Yeah, and I think it's getting more interesting because more and more things are getting connected, right? I mean, think about, we talked about board director's office liability. If you've got a television in your boardroom that I could turn on remotely and listen to everything you're saying, that's a problem, right? Or a refrigerator or a fax machine that's connected to the internet. And companies that are, instead of taking a USB and not being able to have employees USB, I'm just going to upload it to the cloud. You know, how do you prevent that? Anyways, I diverge. So let's go back to incident response. But
If I could just add
yes.
to the vehicles.
Yeah.
Your personal vehicle is something different.
Okay.
Heaven forbid, or whatever, something happens to you, and as Zach Farber was trying to mention earlier, being modest, that information helps law enforcement in an investigation to locate missing children, to locate a homicide victim. So that information can be extremely important. Just saying, don't put it in your rental vehicles.
So Stu, if 95% of cyber insurers require prior written consent before you engage a forensics firm or any firm for that matter, you know, how does that go about if you're sitting and waiting for the claim adjuster to get back? How would you move forward? You know, let's say, for example, you know, for whatever reason, maybe the insurers on a weekend. I've seen Lloyd's of London, you know, and the hack occurs or the attack occurs on a Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Lloyd's is shut, the broker over there is shut down. What do you do if you need prior proof?
Every attack happens at 4 p.m. on Friday.
Any holiday.
I like the expression, I use it a lot in my practice, reasonable efforts towards compliance. That should not happen, the situation that you just presented. Cyber insurers, typically their claim organizations are set up with enough sophistication so that there is a rapid response, but it does happen.
Oh, I've seen a big barrier. I've seen one insurer where it says email us, and there's no phone number on the carrier's website. I have no access to email. How am I going to provide claim notice when I have no email? And I have no phone number with no carrier. I've
So
seen
the
that.
email's compromised.
Right, exactly, right. I mean, again, there's a broad spectrum, but you know, we see interesting things.
I just want to emphasize is that that has not typically been my experience with cyber insurers. Most cyber insurers, I think, are prepared for rapid response and et cetera. But nevertheless, if you do find yourself in a situation, you can't stop the active incident response for legal niceties in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And so we make best efforts towards compliance, we document our efforts, and you seek forgiveness after the fact.
But why would anyone say email us a claim when the bad guy's in your network watching you, giving your incident response plan? Why would anyone do that? Pick up the phone and call them. Why would you have someone email what's going on and, you know, to initiate? Why would anyone do that?
You're assuming that there's not a voice over IP phone that they're listening to as well, right?
You know, one can only know.
I would say most cyber insurers, or at least the ones that I work with, do have some sort of hotline or some sort of service that allows them to, the whole name of the game is rapid response. I mean, that's it. That's what they're paying for. So when we get the call and there's an active ransomware, I find that the first level of trust that you build with the client, because they don't know you at all, you're being sort of introduced to them by the insurance company. Maybe they don't like their insurance company, maybe they don't like insurance companies in general, so you're just some lawyer that they don't know, and you're being sort of introduced to them during this crisis situation, and you do have to develop trust. And I think the first way to do that is to show rapid response, deployment. We try not to let any email go without being responded to at the worst 24 hours. I mean, that would be like the worst. But in an active situation, it's got to be out there. And if we can gather a DFAR firm, a crisis communications firm, the cyber insurer, and get them all on a Zoom call within 20 minutes of receiving that first phone call,
Right.
I think that helps go a long way to develop trust with the policyholder or your client to say, well, this person must know what they're doing since they were able to assemble a team so quickly to, in a sophisticated way, handle my crisis.
What about the 80% under the billion in revenue that don't have cyber insurance? Who are they going to call first?
If my experience is anything, they typically call their security firm first. That's typically how we see those situations. The uninsured, I have a tech problem, I'll call my tech person. What we've noticed is in the last year or two, maybe especially, the tech folks are getting really good at stopping and saying, before we write anything up, you really should call a lawyer. Or, do you have insurance for this? Because they sell insurance for this, and if you have it, now would be the time to use it. So I've noticed that more and more the security folks are more sophisticated holistically in incident response.
And in our case, we do ask those questions at the onset of the call, if there is a call. What I think happens a lot more though is that if the firm has a limited IT staff, then they're using a number of vendors, maybe referred to as MSPs. And when they call those MSPs, this conversation is probably off. They don't know, right? If they are an MSSP, then they're more likely. So the second S is for security, a managed service provider or a managed service security provider. A managed, I think I said that right. But in any event, if they have the second S and they actually intended and meant it, then they actually have a security element like what our company does, at least to some degree. And in those cases, I think they would stop and they would say, let time out, let's gather all the information, let's make sure you've got insurance, make sure you've got legal, because we do need this to be protected, if at all possible. And I see that happening as well, and of course I know it happens with us. But for the companies that are smaller and they don't have the MSSP, they just have in-house IT team or a combination of external resources, I don't think you can count on that.
Yeah, and from a law enforcement perspective, a lot of small businesses are in the cloud, right? So how is that challenging for you doing a forensics with a cloud provider? I mean, you're going to get a search warrant or subpoena for the cloud. Will the cloud providers provide information?
As long as you have a search warrant, you should be able to get the information from the cloud. And then we have forensic tools to assist with cloud data forensic imaging.
And how does it work if there's a multi-tenant server, so more than one company is on one server? How do you protect the integrity of all the other clients not maybe impacted by something? Is that possible?
So we're just looking at one particular company, that's all I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And that's what's written in the subpoena. I'm not going to be worried, we're focused on the other companies.
Yeah.
So we're just going to hone in on that.
Yeah. And of course we mentioned about logs and how important logs are in moving forward. And is it important for an organization to demonstrate loss for you to open up an investigation? I mean, will you look at something where there's no loss? Will the assistant general attorneys?
We'll absolutely look at a case or an incident, regardless of loss, because there's community impact. So, I mean, not everyone loses money in a security breach, but there still could be a significant community impact to all of the other individuals.
Okay. Let's see. Let's talk again. We're going to kind of go on to pivot to third-party service providers. So here's an interesting thing. I don't know if you heard in the news last week. It was announced that there was a software company that focused on education. I won't mention the name, but this educational software company has over 5,000 K through 12 school district clients, over 17 million personally identifiable information records. They were breached. They were hacked. And they're saying that probably well over 1 million students, at least to date. This is the largest breach of school records in history. What's your thoughts, and I'll go down the panel of what's your thoughts with aggregation, companies that are having a lot of data with clients, and one incident could be just destructive for an industry class? Stu.
Sure. That's a very big problem. particularly for the cyber insurers and the reinsurers. That's their whole game, is to try to beat that risk, that aggregate risk. I love the case of schools because we work with a lot of school districts and community colleges as well. And those are really unique matters because there's a lot of challenging issues. Student data is a unique class of data in the law. FERPA is a federal statute that protects student data. And so you have to be really careful when you're handling matters involving student data. But there's also real life stuff that happens in school matters, particularly in the ransomware situation. We had school district get hijacked, and there were numerous K through 12 schools that were affected. Very similar to the situation you just described. And the first decision we had to make, and it was so weird being outside counsel and writing these words down on a piece of paper, but saying, you know, Madam Superintendent, we recommend that you cancel school tomorrow because we didn't have closed caption security cameras, so they couldn't guarantee safety. And we needed to do work, we needed to do remediation and containment, so we needed free access to the boxes, to the computers. And so it would be much easier to have all hands on deck if there's no school in session. So that was a weird situation, and as outside counsel, to make a recommendation to someone for essentially a political person to make an action that has real life consequences to humans that have to figure out childcare and all these other issues. So that's a really challenging area, and I know they are having trouble getting insurance because it is so complicated. And there's a political element to it too, because those are, a lot of times they have to report to school boards, which are political creatures.
Right.
And so whenever there's elected officials involved in a situation, you have to be extra careful with the messaging and sort of how that plays out. There's also a media element to that because it's so front facing so there's a lot of schools today use social media to get the word out. And so you have to be careful with how things are worded. And then you got to beat the parents. A lot of times the teachers are parents in the school district. So the teachers, they find out because they can't go to school tomorrow or they can't access their email. And they're like, and they're putting up on Facebook, the school got hacked, stay away. So there are a lot of nuances when it comes to schools, school districts, higher ed, and the technology that you said, the ed tech. Ed tech is a really awesome area of technology, and it's a growth industry right now because of the COVID and the work from home and all that, and people's eyes opened up to how much remote learning is really possible. But there's tons of data, and so it is really tricky. And you think of student data, you think of ed tech, and you think of student data and grades. It's not just students, it's not just grades. It's teachers and performance reviews, and there's public employee unions.
Right.
So there's a lot of nuances in the education and ed tech sector.
How about the contracts with the school districts and these vendors? Do the vendors, because they can, push all the liability indemnification back to the district, or is there mutual indemnity and hold harmless?
It depends. There's leverage in every negotiation. School districts have a lot of leverage. There's a lot of money. So those ed tech, they'll do anything for the sale,
Right.
we find. And we actually got asked to, in school boards in Texas in particularly, have a lot of power in their purchasing power. And they know what they're doing. They got tons of lawyers. And so no, we found it the opposite. That they made the tech company hold on to all of the liability. So much that there was so much being held on to that it was silly. It was like, there's a liability here that would never even come up that you're assuming.
Yeah.
Because they wanted the sale that badly.
Jay, you have a specialty in healthcare. You want to elaborate a little bit in healthcare aggregation and the things we see. Healthcare is not just financial loss. We're talking about life and death potentially, right?
So yeah, and before we leave the schools, so there's higher ed and academic healthcare, right?
Yeah.
Hospitals and academic situation. The culture there is so open, right? That as soon as you try to lock down an environment, somebody's going to come along and say you can't do that. And so those are just really challenging. And for that, I kind of stay away from academic healthcare related universities and things like that, just because you're not going to win that battle from the expectation of what's going to go on in that school and that. But to me, the two things that worry me the most. One is you can you have a hard time doing something about, and that's the insider threat. And the second, so where the question started off earlier, the second is third-party risk. And so helping clients understand the risk that's introduced to their operation because of the relationships they have with third parties is one of the most significant ways that we can help a customer, because they don't know what is happening, and they assume, even if they ask for certain types of information about that company, that company's following the same security methodology and rigor and structure that they are, assuming that they're doing good stuff. And the unfortunate reality is that many of these companies, unless they're regulated and there's a threat of an audit of some kind, they're likely not to really be doing that level of work from a security perspective. And so that then turns around and poses a tremendous risk. And so when you have a lot of these, and you share this data across a lot of organizations, your risk is exponentially increased because of the nature of your relationships with third parties. Obviously, the insider risk is different, but those are the two that are the hardest to get your arms around inside, and for our experience inside, an organization's risk management.
And with respect to defense for regulatory and health and human services going after enforcement action, but Stu, I guess from a notification, it doesn't have to be. There's alternative means to notify, right? I mean, if there are so many individuals impacted in a state, you've met your obligation, or if there's a certain cost, right, to substitute notify. I guess healthcare, though, I think is unique, right? Because Jay, you could concur that healthcare, it has to be done first by first-class postage. So 50 cents.
There is a substitute notice provision in HIPAA.
Once the first-class postage comes back, but you have to go out of the box first-class postage. So for those that are looking at costs of the healthcare, 50 cents times the number impacted, that's out of the gate what you have to look at. But you can manage a notification by alternative means, whether it's newspapers, website, correct?
Yes, and it's something that we do quite often. You brought up earlier about uninsured clients. There's also underinsured clients. Those are great. We get into a case, and the claim handler sends the matter and says, all right, you use this firm and talk to them. But by the way, there's a $50,000 limit. I'm like, oh, okay, but that doesn't get you really far. So we have to be creative in that, because they have $50,000. You want to use the funds to some objective. But I said before, reasonable efforts towards compliance. You never want to let perfect be the enemy of good. And when it comes to notification, what is the policy behind notification? It's to protect people from the risk of identity theft. It's to let them know that there might be some exposure to a breach of privacy. So how do we accomplish those objectives if you don't have the funds to do e-discovery, which is a fortune, or a broad-based snail mail notification?
What about goodwill? What if I want to voluntarily notify? What's your thoughts on that?
Most of my clients want to voluntarily notify. And they always think they're the only ones. They always say, well, we want to do right by our people. As if that's like a big thing. I'm like, everybody wants to do right by their people, But so we do. That happens all the time.
Right.
So we essentially explain, if it's not legally there's no trigger on the statute. There are ways you can notify and accomplish your corporate Samaritanism objectives without necessarily putting yourselves in some liability exposure. So we'll do informal notifications. We'll let people know that something happened without necessarily using the words compromise or breach or any like the bad words. But when it comes to snail mail notification, then you just have to follow the rules and HIPAA is a prescriptive law, so it tells you exactly what you have to do. California's law is prescriptive, it tells you exactly what you have to do. So, but substitute notice is awesome because it's a way of accomplishing those objectives and without necessarily putting yourselves into financial harm through e-discovery or some broad-based notification. So if you meet the threshold, and it's different in different states. For example, we found out recently in Alabama, it's $5,000. If your breach is going to cost more than $5,000, you can avail yourself of substitute notice. Yet other states, I think Michigan, is like $500,000. So there is a sort of a diversity in the thresholds that you have to get to. But We try to find creative ways to get there. If we think it's going to be a bad reputational hit, maybe there's some value there that we throw in.
Yeah.
You put it up on the website and you put up a press release. We use a press release service to do that. You comply. You trigger legal compliance. You check that box, and you also make your client sort of feel better. And there's other kinds of notification too. It's not always required by statute. There's contractual obligations to notify. So a lot of times that's the one that shocks our clients. When we say, well, are you party to any commercial agreements where maybe you might have an obligation to tell someone that you experienced a security situation? And they're like, oh my God, you're right. And they say, what about, and then a lot of times they can't get to those contracts because they're encrypted. So they have to wait for the decryption to see what the provision is in the agreement. But a lot of times they know.
Yeah.
Because it's a small, like we represented a law firm, and the law firm was doing business for big box retailer stores. They know what they signed. It wasn't their engagement letter. It was the big box retailer's engagement letter. And that provision said, if you experience a security event, including but not limited to ransomware, you must call us immediately at this phone number, leave a message, and someone from our security team will call you back. That was in the contract. So, I mean, you can't get around that. It's very plainly worded. You have to comply.
Anna, can you shut that down though? I mean, if you go into an organization, you see a contract with a big box store, and you're like, listen, we want the lid on this. This is bigger than you guys imagine. Is it possible to kind of contain
We're
it?
not going to regulate and tell you what you can and can't release out. We may make suggestions on an open investigation, maybe leave out the specifics. If you were attacked by ransomware, maybe the specifics on how the ransomware got into your system. We might ask you to hold off while we still conduct our investigation. But we're not going to tell you, don't talk to the press, don't say anything. That's up to your legal team. We're investigators, not lawyers.
Right? And Jay, just the SEC, their proposal about disclosure and things. I mean, is that good or bad? I mean, are you giving more information in your 10K to the bad guys, or?
We're not lawyers either. But yeah, so I mean, I think you do have to be careful about how much the sophistication of the bad actor community is. That they're capable of reading these as well, right? And so if the more you tip your hand about what's going on, I mean, on one hand, you want to be careful about it. On the other hand, the bad guys are going to figure it out anyway, right? I mean, so they're going to do the scans of your system. They're going to look at your people. They're going to go on LinkedIn and look at all the resume, fodder that all of your employees have, and we know how they build this and this and this, and they're using XYZ tools because these people are advocating So now I know. Well, if that's the case, they're using, let's call it something everybody has, an Apache server, and it's got a certain vulnerability. Let's go see if their Apache server has that vulnerability. Oh, it does. I own them, right? And they won't know. That's the big problem is that they will get owned. I mean, it's that they won't know they got owned.
So I'm just thinking out loud is if I want to engage as a company, another organization, they may ask me for my certificate of insurance, right? If I have cyber or E&O and what the limits are and stuff. Is that a good thing to give them electronically? And then how do I not know that certificate's out there on the internet so that the bad guys say if I have cyber insurance and knows the limit? If you just type in Google.
They know.
Yeah.
They know how to do it. We had one where during the negotiations, the threat actor produced a screenshot of our cyber insurance policy. So they know how to read. You know what they also know how to read? Does that have travelers in the room? Is it travelers? So we have Travelers Matter, and the threat actor cited to us the net diligence claim study and a Zurich claim analysis about how much it will cost us if we don't do a deal with them in notification costs and in lawsuits and the average liability. According to the net diligence 2019 claim study, you can expect this and you can expect that. And the Travelers folks that we're dealing with, our jaws drop because they're using our own stuff against us.
There's an article. There's an article floating around on LinkedIn where there's a gentleman, and I'm pretty sure he's with an insurance company, who does a 15-20 minute discussion about how the bad guys are actually getting that data and using that data against the insurance process when they do something bad, that there's a claim being filed, and they're trying to collect as much out of that claim as possible.
How many, I'm just out of kind of questions of, how many of you in the audience have actually even run yourself through Google? Yeah, and it's just kind of sometimes interesting to just see what's being said about you or not, and what information. I mean, from images to, I mean, we have law enforcement here in Atlanta. I'm part of InfraGard, and I invited the supervisory special agent in, and I had her picture I found it on actually a YouTube video. And I went right up to her, and she goes, "How do you know who I am?" I don't have, I'm like, "I found it on YouTube." And she was kind of surprised by that, but you know, it's just interesting and it's on there forever, you know? So anyways, so public relations. Huh? Oh, yes.
For some of the law enforcement folks,
Yes.
right? I think we're trying to, as a society, decide whether everything is okay being digital, and we accept the fact that your policies and your net diligence reports are just going to be found. Or should we be stepping that back, or do we accept that as inevitable and instead focus on security?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are talking about cars. Our car runs on Google, which is horrifying, but like, there it is. Like, we didn't have a choice.
So you try to mitigate as best you can, right? Security training is extremely important to your employees because, and I was talking to my coworker over there earlier about how I don't have a social media presence for so many reasons.
I tried to link you on LinkedIn for this, but you weren't there.
No, but think of how just think of how many companies have who their CEOs are and who their employees are, their biographies, where they went to college, what their email address is, their email address for the company. All of that information can be used against you. You're giving it out there for information for a company, for other clients to possibly contact you, but you're also giving that information out to, oh, they went to LaSalle University, they grew up in Philadelphia. I'm getting all of their information. Oh, what was their mother's maiden name? What was their favorite dog? Do I find an old MySpace? There we go. Photos of you as a child. The dog's name was Fluffy. You're getting all of those signature keywords that you would use to get into a system. So mitigate as best you can, train your employees.
But it's inevitable.
So I'm going to step into the security hat for a second, right? And so it's a myth that prevention is a valid posture. There is no prevention. We've done many exercises from a red team perspective, being asked to try to penetrate an organization. We've never failed, and we're not that good at it, right? So the people that are really good at it, you know, they have a better track record than we do. But that said, so prevention. So what do, right? If prevention is not a viable option, there's a couple things that we have to think about. So one is, do we put everything online, right? Is there a way to create much more secure environments where that data is really restricted? It warrants consideration, especially depending on the nature of the organization. The other thing is, and this is something we've talked about around events. So we've had a lot of conversation around events and incidences. How do you know you had one? Right? I mean, unless one of you guys call us up and say, we found all your data on the dark web, how do you know? Right? And so from a budgetary standpoint, if we talk to most clients, probably the organizations represented in this room, we're going to find that about 90% of the budget is spent on prevention, which is a myth. Can't really do it. 5 to 8% are going to be spent on response, which means you can't trigger it because I didn't detect it, right? So detection is the tripwire that has to happen. It has to be there. And so for organizations that are really worried about and concerned about, rather, their information being protected, the understanding what the baseline of your environment from a traffic, logs, all that we talked about earlier standpoint. What is occurring? What is not normal? And when something not normal happens, somebody addresses it. And if they discover that it's not a big deal, you know, hey, we found that the CEO logged in from China. Okay, well, he was there. All right, well, there may be other issues with that, but it's not like it was, okay, it was normal. But if he logged in from China and simultaneously was logged in on his desk in New York, that's probably an indicator that there's something that we should address. It's no longer an event, right? It's now risen to an incident. So that's one thing. The second thing is we were talking about OSINT, the open source intelligence. If you really want to scare yourself, go find a couple of OSINT related tools and run them against your organization. And you know, you might need to go to your tech team and ask them to help you do that. But what is already available about your organization online is why the whole notion of prevention is irrelevant, right? The data is there, it's been there, it's going to stay there, you know, but this is real live, real-time type access to information. I deal with companies that say, well, we don't want you to scan us. Don't worry about that, I'll go to Google, they scan you every night, right? And I'll get all the data that I wanted to go passively, I won't have to touch a thing. And so, right, and then they're like, what do you mean? And we show them the reports that you can pull from those tools. And they're very enlightening, and they help, if the company is really interested in protecting themselves, if they're really interested in protecting themselves, then they'll actually engage some of these types of activities, and then use that as part of their information security culture and drive that from leadership down through the organization, because you learn what the bad guy can see. And until you have visibility like that, you're fighting a battle you don't even know you're fighting. And so, anyway, that's my security thing.
Terrific. We're kind of wrapping up. We'd like to ask again if you have any questions for us. Just raise your hand. We'll get a mic up to you. And while we're waiting for that, I'd like the panelists just to think about just a quick closing statement on your part before we depart.
I'll just make a comment. The big takeaway for me of this whole day has been about security culture. And you asked a question a little while ago, like how many people have gotten one of those notifications that there's been a security breach and you can sign up for data security, and almost everybody raises their hand. And somebody who I like makes the comment that there are two types of people, those who have been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked. And so we all know we've been hacked because we got that. Separately, you talk about the risk of being on social media. And if I go on social media and tell everyone my birthday is January 1st on Facebook because I want you to say happy birthday to me, do I understand that because I know I've been hacked, I'm now giving the hacker an additional piece of information they can use against me, my birthday? My point in this is just saying, if we're going to enhance security culture, that kind of awareness needs to be broad, because I don't think, I mean, your case is specialized, but you should be able to go onto Facebook and tell me what your birthday is, because I want to friend you and tell you happy birthday. And you're kind of preventing yourself from participating in society if you don't understand this, and that you're using your credit card in a restaurant. The restaurant might get hacked. Your birthday is now on Facebook. The hacker can go find you on Facebook and has an additional piece of data. It's just part of security culture that we all have to learn.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Just concerning cars. If you're going to sell your car now, would you say to have it wiped of your information before you turn it in or not?
Cars. So
Yes.
if you're going to turn in your car now, say it's 1 year old, it's got all your information on it, do you recommend it to be wiped clean?
All you have to do is do the factory reset on it, just like you would on your phone, right? Do you turn in your cell phone when
No.
you exchange it out?
No, I have every one I had.
Some people exchange them
I
out.
can't keep cars though.
Some people change out their phones because they get the deal or whatever. You do a factory reset. It's not perfect, but it's still
It doesn't
one.
wipe it though, right?
I got a
It
USB on it.
just- Even the reset though doesn't really get rid of your
It
data.
doesn't necessarily get rid of it, but what is the likelihood of that person who's buying your car, again, having the forensic knowledge to get the track log data off of your phone and your contacts.
And then use it against.
And then use it against you, because that's going to be specific to you. For us, it's the importance of that track log data and the event data on vehicles was to find missing children, to find homicide victims, to point, no, the subject was saying that, no, I wasn't there. I'm like, no, your phone and your car were here. We can tell that you went park, reverse, drive, reverse again, all in this one geolocation. So that information helps us as far as vehicle goes. Does that help answer?
Yeah, I get that, but my phone, you can have your banking information, stock information, everything on it, and how do you know that it just doesn't get sucked into your car the next time?
That's not what's being tracked in your car. Think about it. Are you paying with a device inside your, I mean, I'm sure that's coming, right?
Perhaps.
A little chip in your car that you can just pay as you drive through a drive-through. That's not something that I've observed being logged or tracked as far as credit card information. It's contacts, it's location, text messaging. That's what I've observed mainly in the track log data for vehicles.
Lots to think about. Think about all the appliances at home. Stu, we're going to end this up. Stu, last thoughts.
So congratulations to Jason, he did a great job.
Jack, last thoughts?
No, I got you.
No,
You're good? We're good. We appreciate your participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. When this convenes, don't get up yet. We have some housekeeping items because those of you that are going to the reception of the game, you need a ticket because of the wristband. I'm going to bring out my lovely, beautiful wife. She's with Blue Cap Studios with her partner, Dave. She's got her Mets gear on. She's ready to go. She's got the tickets, not me. She's got all the tickets and she's got all the power. So before I thank the sponsors and thank all of you, she is going to be at the glass doors down the hallway on the other side of the elevator. Follow the signs. Anybody that has a wristband will get a ticket and go into the suite. It should be ready to go at this point. And if you have an electronic ticket, just show them where they're going to scan it. I don't know at this point, but Jeff is going to find out. Before we convene, I want to thank all the sponsors. Without all of your help and with your participation, your sponsorship, your volunteer activities, we couldn't have an event like this. Thank you. So I want to announce everybody for the diamond sponsor, Pondurance. You're out here everywhere. You're over here. Thank you very much. For the platinum sponsors, Blue Cap Studios, right there, they did all the signage. Every single piece of graphic signage, the static image, the banner, the step and repeats, it's all Blue Cap. And the name badges. So I want to thank Blue Cap. We have InTouch, and then we have TriNet. Who's here from TriNet? There you go. Thank you very much. Without your participation, InTouch Insurance is a client of TriNet's. We are on their platform and it changed our agency and our operation, and our employees are thankful for that. So thank you, TriNet. Gold sponsor, Clausen Miller. Where is Hillard Sterling? Want to thank Hillard right there, one of the panelists in the morning. Thank you. M. Logica, John and his team. Thank you. I want to thank all the Secret Service members. I am a member of the task force of the Secret Service for cyber crimes in Los Angeles and on Beverly Hills. So I want to thank all of you for coming and speaking on the panel. So thank you. And CRC Group, they are a general agency and we partner with them. So thank you, CRC. And then for the silver sponsors, Clyde and Company, Mark Vosis, he was on the third panel today. Dew Point Capital. Louis Brisbane, I want to thank everybody from Louis and Maria for speaking on the panel. Thank you very much. They will be at they have a table set up in the suite. And Wilson Elser, I want to thank Rich and Kelly. Thank you very much. And then all the bronze sponsors, we have Beasley's, Concierge Cyber Ops, that's Kurt's. So thank you, Kurt. Fisher Broyles, that's Stu's company, thank you. Generation 9, Holden, he was on the second panel today. We have Intact Insurance, thank you. We have Just IT Pros, Kevin and Chuck. We have New York Life, Jesse and Joey. We have George from OmniStruct. He's over here somewhere. Thank you, George. He was on the first panel. We have Paven Carter, photographer. Where's Paven, the photographer, right there? Thank you, Paven. And we have folks. So thank you. So Deb's going to go down to the glass door, so give us a second. We have another event that is a golf tournament for non-golfers and for golfers, and we have a cyber and HR component to it, and it's in Los Angeles. We will send you the information. It's another InTouch Live event if you're on the West Coast or if you're in Los Angeles. That is going to, most of the proceeds are going to be going to a nonprofit called Secure the Village that George Usi from OmniStruct and I are on the board. So it's charitable and it's going to be a lot of fun. So we'll send that out if you're in sunny Southern California. There might not be any water out there, but it's 72 every day. Every day. No rain, no snow, nothing. 72 degrees. So while Deb gets set up over there, I hope this was informative. You'll be getting information from our marketing intern, Christian, about what you liked about the event, what you would like to see, if you would like to have another one, and we will go from there. This has been a unique event in 2.5 years in planning. It's 2 different events in one. We have the sessions and then we have the game and the reception and the suites. So thank you for all bearing with us regarding the wristbands and the tickets. So anyways, I think she'll make her way down there. So